The week's damage didn't arrive with sirens. It arrived the way the most politically devastating material always arrives in Kimmel's hands, as a series of reasonable questions, placed in a specific order, each one building on the last until the cumulative weight becomes impossible to shake off with a press statement or a pivot to Bible readings. Caroline Leavitt opened the week by asking the press corps for something specific: blind faith. The president does not bluff. When he makes a promise, he follows through. After 10 years of covering this president, the American media should understand this by now. Kimmel obliged by treating it as a research assignment. Ukraine, one day. Tax returns, promised repeatedly across multiple cycles. The new healthcare plan, announced, re-announced, and quietly retired. The wall, Greenland, the gold commode he sits on, which Kimmel used as the benchmark for the reliability of his word. The effect was not primarily comedic, it was evidentiary. When you place a confident claim about reliability directly next to a documented record of the specific things that were promised and not delivered, the claim doesn't need to be argued against. It argues against itself. The receipts are the rebuttal, the war chart, the timeline, and the draft dodger's military genius. The Vietnam moment was the week's single most structurally complete piece of material, and Kimmel understood that from the moment Trump said it on live television. "I would have won Vietnam very quickly. I would have if I were president." The setup builds itself. The draft dodger, who received a medical deferment citing bone spurs from a podiatrist who rented office space from the Trump family, while simultaneously playing football, baseball, basketball, and soccer at the military academy his parents enrolled him in, announced on live television that his personal military genius would have efficiently resolved the war he engineered a documented medical excuse to avoid participating in. Kimmel's delivery was architectural. He laid the bone spur deferment next to the multi-sport athletic career at military school, let the gap between those two facts breathe for exactly long enough, and then delivered the Titanic line as the close. And if he had been captain of the Titanic, Leonardo DiCaprio would be alive today. The chart Trump himself produced: World War I, 4 years and 3 months; World War II, 6 years; Korean War, 3 years; Vietnam, 19 years; Iraq, 8 years. I'm 5 months. Provided additional material without requiring any invention. Trump credited himself for wars he didn't fight, couldn't get his own timeline right, and was actually 2 months into the current conflict rather than 5. Kimmel simply noted that the man claiming military genius doesn't know how long his own war has been running. The $175 billion that nobody could access. The tariff story is where the week's comedy shaded hardest into something that functioned more like investigative commentary than entertainment. In February, the Supreme Court ruled that Trump's tariffs were illegal and required repayment. Over 56,000 companies registered to reclaim funds. The government website built to process those refunds, the portal through which $175 billion in legally mandated repayments was supposed to flow, did not work. Kimmel's summary of this sequence was flat and precise. The tariffs were illegal. The country owes $175 billion to the businesses his policies damaged, and the government website created to return that money is completely broken. No exaggeration was added. The facts in sequence produce their own conclusion. That is the specific kind of material that makes satire function as accountability. Not invented outrage, but documented reality, presented in an order that makes the pattern visible. The Bible, the Spirit Airlines parallel, and the Apple story. Trump's response to the $175 billion tariff disaster was a pre-recorded Bible reading as part of America Reads the Bible Week. Kimmel's observation that since Trump took office, Americans had been praying considerably more than 1 hour per week landed because it required no setup. The timing provided the context. The nightstand Bible joke. Every night before bed, he takes the Bible from his nightstand. It burns his hand, and he goes back to sleep. Is the kind of line that works because it crystallizes a characterization that has been built across years of observable behavior into a single image. It doesn't argue the point, it illustrates it. The Spirit Airlines comparison was structurally elegant. A budget airline facing liquidation where every seat is a middle seat, and a president asking whether the government might intervene to save it, which Kimmel translated as asking for another free plane. Donald Trump, in many ways, is the Spirit Airlines of presidents. The parallel, all the branding of a major operation, the consistent experience of choosing the worst available option and finding it worse than advertised, landed because the audience had already done the comparison themselves before Kimmel completed the sentence. The Apple story was the week's most complete example of Kimmel's method in practice. Trump's fabricated anecdote: an elderly woman who brought 3 apples to the cash register, discovered the price had risen 40%, and was forced to return one, was designed to humanize the economic pain of his own tariff policies while somehow attributing that pain to previous leadership. A completely invented sad story, deployed to generate emotional cover for a policy creating the exact conditions being described. Kimmel sent someone to find her. The interview, the woman explaining that she affords her apples through services rendered in the alley behind the supermarket to men who pull up in cars, is the kind of segment that works not because it's the funniest joke of the week, but because it's the most honest response to a fabricated story. Trump invented a character to produce an emotion. Kimmel replaced the invented character with a real response to the fabricated framing, and the contrast between the gentle sympathy the story was designed to generate and the absolute chaos of what actually emerged made the original manipulation visible by destroying it completely. The negotiation that nobody was running. The Iran ceasefire extension, issued on a Tuesday because, as Kimmel noted, it was Taco Tuesday, so why not, produced its own set of problems that existed entirely independently of any comedic framing. Anonymous White House officials told CNN that the negotiations had been damaged by Trump live tweeting them. Kimmel's characterization, like a 9th-grade girl watching Euphoria, was memorable, but the underlying detail was the story. People inside the administration, speaking to journalists without authorization, confirming that the president's real-time social media commentary on active military negotiations was actively harming those negotiations. The J.D. Vance situation added a second layer. Trump told ABC News that Vance would not be part of the negotiations. His own staff simultaneously told reporters that Vance would be part of the negotiations. Kimmel's conclusion, he's either not in the loop or just ignoring the loop, was not a partisan attack. It was an observation about internal coherence that the administration's own simultaneous contradictory statements had already made before Kimmel said anything about them. The tin can phone suggestion, getting the president one of those children's devices not connected to the internet, was funny because it addressed a real operational problem with a solution scaled to the apparent severity of the issue. What the week added up to. Kimmel's specific skill, demonstrated across this week's accumulation, is the ability to hold a large number of individually significant stories in a single frame and reveal the thread connecting them. Vietnam and tariffs and Bible readings and Spirit Airlines and Apple stories are not obviously related, but placed in sequence, each one becomes evidence in a single argument. The distance between the image being sold and the reality being documented is not incidental. It is structural. It runs through everything. The tough guy who dodged Vietnam with a convenient foot injury. The financial genius whose tariffs were ruled illegal and whose refund portal doesn't work. The man of his word whose word has a documented track record available to anyone with a search engine. The dealmaker live tweeting negotiations his own staff says he is damaging. The empathetic storyteller inventing elderly women returning apples to cover for the policies causing the conditions he's describing. Each story would be significant alone. Together, they form something harder to dismiss. A pattern that comedy can name more efficiently than formal criticism, because comedy doesn't require the audience to read a white paper. It requires them to laugh at something true and then sit with why it was true after the laugh fades. The Apple woman's final answer was absurd. The story it ended was not. And that gap between the absurdity of the comedic frame and the real conditions that made the frame necessary is where Kimmel does his most consequential work. Subscribe if you believe the truth is funnier than the lies. On a week like this one, the truth didn't need much help.